Hey, hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, three film geeks discussing movies both new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week, Pierce Brosnan is the November Man. Young adults get trapped in the catacombs in the found-footage film As Above, So Below, and we review two lightly themed Christian films, The Identical and When the Game Stands Tall. Our home media moment is Oscar-nominated foreign film Omar, and our triple feature of older films is brought to us by the letter A, as in Arbitrage, An American Crime, and Anastasia. We'll also do a recap of our favorite summer films in this week's Top 5. First up, though, is The November Man, and Joe's going to tell us about that.
Thank you, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
It is a 2014 spy thriller film based on the novel There Are No Spies, starring Pierce Brosnan and Olga Kurylenko, and directed by Ronald Donaldson.
Oh, good old Rondon.
The director of some great horror films like Species. Well, I don't know, it depends on who you talk to.
I thought it was alright.
I enjoy it. Bronson plays secret agent codenamed The November Man, who's in retirement after a job went wrong 5 years previous. However, his old boss comes to him to help retrieve an undercover agent working to expose the Russian presidential candidate for war crimes. Meanwhile, a reporter named Mila, played by Kurylenko, is working to expose the war criminal as well. This film has some intriguing elements for its characters and plot to be interesting. The setup is decent, and Brosnan doesn't play into his old Bond persona, which is a good thing. However, the problem is that the movie ultimately becomes trapped in every spy thriller cliché imaginable, making it seem like a lesser Tom Clancy adaptation. I was moderately interested in the characters and the twists, and the pacing was fairly good, but just not good enough to break free from a mostly weak supporting cast and some overdramatic themes. Only would recommend to those who are really into hardcore spy films if you're a hardcore spy fan. Otherwise, just wait around for the next Bond or Bourne movie, and I give it a C.
Justin, how about The November Man for you?
There was an overwhelming question that plagued my mind while I watched The November Man, and that was simply, what audience is this film aiming for? On one hand, it wants to be a slow-burn spy thriller the likes of John le Carré's Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and A Most Wanted Man, and at others it seems to be yet another, by any means necessary, action piece, like the Bourne franchise. Though, in some instances in the film, it feels more like 24. It's not that either of these are necessarily bad, though the consistently underwhelming use of slow-mo and action sequences gets annoying, but neither of them feels particularly complete. This is due to the fact that right from the get-go, the film rushes through everything. No one feels particularly well-developed as a character, and moods shift at times for largely no reason, and in one case reducing the protagonist to being a sadistic manipulator. And even when more exposition is finally given, it feels like too little, too late. Admittedly, the mystery portion is rather interesting, and had they gotten started on that earlier, it would have been a better film. But as a whole, The November Man is not the action-packed suspense thriller it wants to be, but instead a tired and mediocre excuse for last-minute summer entertainment, and I give it a C.
Well, this film proves once again that Brosnan is best in these action roles, dating back to Remington Steele. After Bond, he tried to do like the romance thing and the drama. It's just, that doesn't work for me. And as such, there is some good interplay between him and Kurylenko. But honestly, the best thing I can say about this film is that it's all basically okay. The performances are good, it's entertaining enough, the action sequences do the job, but literally nothing about this movie is anything special. Now, I will give it that the very end doesn't cop out, and I liked that. So for that, I will push it to a C+, but that's about the best that I think this deserves. Not a great action film, although better than some of the ones we've seen this year.
Yeah.
3
Days to Kill.
Yeah, Joe, you mentioned 3 Days to Kill earlier.
Significant improvement with that, at least.
Yeah, that was really bad.
Yeah, I agree. It's pretty mediocre. I thought everything was okay. I just felt like the supporting cast wasn't that great for the most part. Some of the acting was a little hokey. And I do agree with Justin that the characters really were so underdeveloped because right from the get-go, they pretty much rush into things, and it feels like everything could use like another few minutes or an extra scene to flesh out the characters a little more.
Mm-hmm.
Would have made it stronger.
I just kept thinking, like, if they had just let this movie breathe, we would have had a stronger piece.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, and the banter between him and like the new guy, like when they're on the phone and he's like chasing him, is so like hacky and
passe.
Yeah, it's very blah and passe. I also really hate the title of this movie. I didn't understand the explanation in the film. They said they call him the November Man because when he leaves a place, there's nothing left. I mean,
what does that mean?
The best I could do is
death, fall,
that because
winter's coming.
Yeah, like winter's coming, so that the like leaves and stuff die and the grass. That's like the best I could come up with.
To be fair, it's like the 7th.
Pretty corny.
It's based on the 7th book in the series, so it's not like it's something that's supposed to be well established, I guess.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, you'd think for a new audience that it's kind of weird. It sounds cool.
Well, and they don't say it until maybe the last like 10 minutes of the movie.
It's like he is the November Man. Like,
Yeah.
He was.
So I thought that was
honestly
just adding to the stupidity of the film.
They just went with it to kind of attract fans of the book series, and because it sounds like a cool title. Mm-hmm. It's the real answer.
Right.
The code name, I don't think it probably makes sense even in context for the series that much.
Yeah, it definitely didn't seem to. But I don't know. This hasn't been a particularly good year for action anyway. Non-stop is the only thing I can think of other than superhero movies.
No, I agree. That's probably
well,
the best
Snowpiercer, I guess, too.
Raid 2 for me and Joe.
Yeah, I like Raid 2.
I'm sorry, Joe and I.
Yeah,
but...
I guess that's an action movie.
In terms of like gun shooting and
it's
big
more of a
explosions.
martial arts movie, but yeah, I mean that's obviously a type of action.
For general action, in terms of thrillers, I think Non-Stop is the best.
Right, I agree. But let's move on here to As Above, So Below, and Justin's going to tell us about that. We got a little sneak preview in our mini-sode of where Justin put this film, so...
What a shocker, actually.
Yeah, it was a bit of a shock, but let's hear the full review.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Scarlett, played by Perdita Weeks, is a young alchemist searching with her team to find the Philosopher's Stone, a project that caused her father to go mad. As their search leads them down into the catacombs below France, the team slowly finds themselves fighting through hell itself, confronting their demons in the process to stand any chance of getting back to the surface. As Above, So Below is yet another film this year in which I find myself struggling to find a reason not to pan it and failing miserably. Although the marketing team offered up quite possibly one of the better trailers released this year, most of the selling points advertised, which aren't nearly as good in the final product, don't occur until roughly an hour into the movie, which is about 2/3, and before that just waste time with painfully boring exposition. None of the characters are particularly interesting despite the quasi-potential concept, and the film is rife with stereotypes that audiences have come to know from the found footage genre. The camera work is nauseatingly bad, horror sequences are almost impossible to see, and the bulk of the visuals that the audience can muster through are just creepy imagery that would probably be better suited on a haunted hayride rather than this mess of a film. Despite not being as bad as the 11 other failures I've had the misfortune of viewing this year, As Above, So Below becomes number 12.
You failed 12 movies so far this year? I think I'm up to 5, maybe?
I don't know.
Joe, only a couple, I think, for you.
Early in the year, there were a couple Fs, but
yeah.
I've been honestly like skirting by. I think even like for the summer, I think there was only the Legends of
Maybe
Oz was
one
an
or
F,
two.
and I bumped that down.
Yeah.
I think everything else is like a D or D plus.
Mm-hmm. Well, look, I'm not going to pretend this movie is spectacular, but of all the shaky cam found footage films of the last few years, I actually rank this one among the best. It's directed, I thought, incredibly well in the small spaces that it had. The acting is serviceable for this kind of film. I don't think we, expect horror movies typically to have Oscar-worthy performances. I will admit that some things definitely don't make sense or aren't explained at all. The characters themselves are fairly bland, as Justin mentioned, and the conclusion wasn't my favorite, but I thought adding in the history stuff was a cute hook, and though it's been done to death, I liked that there were two different groups of kids going on the journey, and everybody kind of had their own reasons for going. I honestly had a pretty good time in this movie. Certainly enjoyed it more than The November Man. For me, I give it a B-. Joe, what'd you think?
As Above, So Below. It's yet another found footage movie retreading old horror ideas. While I will admit that the general idea is actually kind of interesting, the plot and characters and performances were all about as cliche as the style would recommend it to be. Unfortunately, it is not what I wanted to be, kind of a combination of the Harry Potter and Fullmetal Alchemist franchise. It's something I've been wanting, for many years.
Because the Philosopher's Stone.
Philosopher's Stone and Nicholas Flamel. I mean,
sure.
Like it's a little bit of everything for you. So, not quite what I was expecting. I will admit, though, I was kind of impressed because I felt that the claustrophobic nature of the film was rather unsettling at some points.
Mm-hmm.
I thought they actually made some pretty good use of the camera work for there. Overall, I thought it was fairly moderate entertainment. I thought it served its purpose for some cheap thrills. There were some cool stylistic elements here, but overall it was just pretty generic, and I give it a C-.
That really was my favorite part. as they were going into like smaller and smaller spaces. I thought it was directed pretty well. Justin, that was one of your
Oh
big
my
issues
goodness,
with
no.
it. Yeah, you hated
No.
that.
It's shaky. You can barely see anything. I'll give you the fact that it's cool they were actually in the catacombs, but it's just so unbelievably boring that they can't have anything focused or able to see anything.
You couldn't really see anything?
No, I thought it was a complete nightmare to try and get anything viewed in this movie. I thought the direction was atrocious.
All right, but forget the direction itself for a second. You thought it was like really dark and stuff? Because I didn't find that.
Some scenes were darker than others.
Some scenes were decidedly darker than others, and it's not even close to being some of the worst lighting I've ever seen in movies. But
To be fair, though,
I mean, when I'm talking about difficult to see, I'm not talking about necessarily lighting, but rather the matter that they're shaking the camera so much, throwing it in 18 different directions and from 5 different camera angles. It's just ridiculous.
well, to be fair, it's found footage. It's something you could kind of argue is sort of a staple.
It is found footage, but there's a time and a place. There's a certain technique in terms of that you can keep it shaky, but there's a point where it just becomes, okay, there's an amateur shaking the camera around because he feels like it's authentic.
Well, to be fair, though, it's kind of hard to look at the other way. If there's somebody obviously holding a really good shot at a certain point when it might not be appropriate for them to have that shot. I mean, you have these kids who are basically running around in like this really tight, close space that is essentially the bowels of hell. I mean, yeah, they're going to be shaking the camera on a lot. Heck, technically, they shouldn't have it on anyway, but then it's a movie.
And it's on their lights.
Heads. Yeah, so I mean,
you
figure if
it's not like they were holding the camera, because listen, that's one of my biggest problems in some of these movies.
The
is that
excuses.
people are holding the camera while they should be dropping it and running. In this movie, at least
there's a reason for it to be there.
The camera is a pin camera on their headlamp, so I sort of didn't mind that at all. As opposed to some of the other things we've seen in the found footage movies.
I thought it worked pretty well for creating that tight atmosphere, personally. Like, there were a couple scenes that I thought were pretty unsettling.
Like I said, the catacombs bit is interesting. The claustrophobic thing, if they had stuff going on that was actually engaging and, dare I say, tension-worthy, I would have been all for it. But instead, it drags, it's not well developed, the storyline goes all over the place. Like I said, we don't even get to hell until about 2/3 of the movie.
Yeah, it is, but I mean, it's not necessarily... I mean, I guess you maybe saw the previews more than I did. I didn't really remember the hell element being so...
It's what they played up.
Okay.
It is.
Even though it's only kind of half.
Yeah, I see that was sort of lost on me, I guess, because I've only seen the preview maybe a couple times. But, I mean, I thought that was just sort of an interesting, I don't want to say twist, but an interesting development as they go along. I mean, they're obviously not going to get to hell in the first floor of the catacombs.
You'd hope not, yeah.
No.
You know?
But at the same time, do we really want to have it when we can only devote 1/3 of the movie to it? It's ridiculous.
I don't know. I think sometimes there have been some horror movies where they kind of build things up and you only see like the major scale for, a certain limited period of time.
But here's the difference, Joe. Those movies at least pace themselves appropriately and devote enough tension that when we do finally get to that Act 3, when there's a lot more going on, we're ready for it and we can appreciate it more. My go-to for that would actually be The Conjuring.
Oh, okay.
To use a contemporary example.
Well, obviously. But to be fair, though, once again, Justin, that's a much bigger film with more experienced directors behind it. So that's not the best comparison.
I get what you're saying, but I don't think that inexperience means that gives you an excuse to do a crummy job in directing.
I do agree that maybe they shook the camera around a little too much, but I think there was a reasonable explanation for it. I mean, I agree with you, Justin. There were problems with the movie, but I did think there was some decent tension.
I feel like if you're running around with the camera on your head...
I'm okay with that.
know,
I'm not okay with it like...
It's going to shake around, though, is the point.
There's shaking, and then there's like, okay, I feel like I'm literally sitting on top of a dryer with camera on, watching it rumble back and forth every 18 seconds.
I thought it added to the tension. I like Joe, thought that there were definitely times when it was a little tense.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, my thing for these horror movies, really for any horror movie, not just the found footage ones, but, I sort of like to place myself in the elements, and I don't know, I was a little creeped out by what was going on in this movie. Yeah. I wouldn't be on this mission, but if I were dragged along like the one guy that didn't want to go.
Yeah, the tour guide guy.
No, not the tour guide. Her friend.
Oh, her friend.
Yeah. Whose brother died in the
that
drowning,
guy.
And so he didn't want to go, and then he ended up going. That would be me. But I don't know. I thought it was chilling enough. I didn't find the pacing an issue either. I wasn't necessarily like bored with it. I didn't think it was too slow.
I think it was that boring. I thought it was okay.
Yeah. All right, well, up next we've got The Identical, and in this, Ray Liotta and Ashley Judd play a preacher and barren wife in the South in the 1930s, when one of the poorer families in the parish gives them one of their twin baby boys that they can't afford to take care of, on the condition that he not know he has an identical twin. Cut to the 1950s, and the preacher's son Ryan, played by Blake Rain, a delivery man who loves to sing rock and roll just like his idol, Drexel Hemsley, who is also played by Rain, happens to be the other twin baby from the beginning that the poor family kept. Drexel Hemsley is supposed to basically be Elvis Presley, and that's where The Identical goes completely off the rails, though I'd argue it wasn't ever even on the right track to begin with. The script is anemic. The performances, other than from Liotta and Judd, are basically laughable. The Presley wannabe connection is insulting to anybody that's ever even heard an Elvis record. Rain looks and sounds the part, which makes sense since he's a professional Elvis impersonator, but his acting is terrible, and the Presley sound-alike songs they have him sing are even worse. It is a horrible film, easily one of the worst of the year. I never thought I would say this, Joe, about a Liotta movie, but The Identical for me is an F.
Oh.
Yep. So there's another one for my F list. Joe, what did you think of The Identical?
This movie annoyed me from the first trailer.
Mm-hmm.
The concept would be kind of interesting if it was actually about, real Elvis, or even a real Elvis impersonator would be a more interesting story.
That's what I thought it was going to be.
Something. That would be a more interesting tale. The fact that it's generic and it's a safe discount version of everything, that would be a much more interesting story about Elvis. This thing is basically a recycled, briefly commercialized version of what we really want to see. Maybe they didn't want to pay the rights. I'm not sure. A lot more meat that could have been found here. I agree with you completely, Dan. Liotta and Judd do pretty good as for their parts in the film, but everyone else is just terrible.
Mm-hmm.
It's safe. It's generic. It has no real meat. Some people might find it charming, but I thought it was one of the biggest eye rollers I've ever seen, and I give it a D.
Oh, wow. No F, though.
No F.
Okay. Because of the great Ray Liotta performance?
They had some decent scenes, yeah.
They did. It was certainly the only thing even remotely worthwhile about the film.
Yeah.
Justin, what did you think of The Identical?
If there is ever an exhausted narrative motif in cinema today, it would probably be that in which the same actor plays the twin, or double, of another character in the film. Yes, it can be integral to the storyline, but more often than not in these films, it just comes off as hokey. In the case of The Identical, it honestly means well, but it just can't seem to find its footing when it doesn't seem to have an original thought in its head. While I thought some of the songs were passable as Elvis knockoffs, they constantly seem reminiscent of the music of Elvis, and I guess pretty much ripping him off at some points.
Yeah.
And they never really have any feeling of authenticity. Director Dustin Marcellino seems to have a number of cinematic influences, sometimes drawing reference to Martin Scorsese, but just seems to be taking a page from their playbooks instead of doing anything all his own. I didn't consider the acting as bad as you two did, even though Rain, I believe you said his name is, was not particularly good, and the writing is beyond predictable, and it just doesn't really allow them to flex much dramatic muscle, and instead comes across as fluffy, which is probably the best way I can think of to describe this film. I didn't think it was a complete disaster. I did like the look in terms of fitting the timeline, but it just doesn't manage to be anything more than, like I mentioned before, fluffy and rather forgettable in a sea of music biopics that are digging deeper and hitting harder, and I give it a D+.
But that's the problem. It's not even a music biopic.
It's a fake one.
It's a fake ripoff of people that don't exist. It would be like Get On Up. Instead of James Brown, it's John Black.
And it's,
well, then let me take that back.
And the thing is this. It's not even like they're doing an original story.
Right.
They're obviously trying to just feed off of something else. Why not just do a movie about Elvis or an Elvis impersonator?
And if you
or
don't
somebody
know,
that was inspired by Elvis.
Elvis had a twin that died at birth.
How about there?
It's as if the movie is like
Elvis fan fiction.
Elvis fan fiction. What if Elvis's twin didn't die?
But it's not Elvis.
But he was given away to somebody else, and then but it's not even Elvis.
So why do we care?
It's so awful.
And I agree with you, Justin. It's complete fluff. That's why I hate it. I hate movies that are just like not.
They serve no purpose.
They have
nothing to say.
There's no reason. There's no driving force for this movie to even exist. It's just stupid. It's a waste
Right.
of time. It's a waste of time.
And I guess, to go back to another movie we talked about this week, Justin, As Above, So Below, at least had a purpose in it was trying to scare you. This movie literally has no purpose. Even the inspirational stuff isn't really that inspirational.
Not
No.
really.
It really serves no purpose. And, he's so awful. And he's the lead,
It's pretty bad.
of the movie, and then the side character as well. I mean, the twin thing didn't really bother me. They've been doing twin thing, for
It's
decades and decades.
My point is just that it was a stale motif.
To be fair, 2014 has been the year of twins. I mean, Enemy, Face of Love.
That's true. There have been a few people playing their twins this year. That is a good point. I was thinking more along the lines of Phoebe and Ursula from Friends, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. The twin thing was that was the whole hook of the movie, so that part didn't bother me. They just didn't get a charismatic person. I mean, come on, Elvis Presley, you're supposed to try and be one of the most charismatic people, in music history. This guy just didn't have it.
No, not even remotely.
No.
And you could tell it wanted to be so grandiose, but it just wasn't. It fell flat pretty much everywhere.
That's a
Way too
really
ambitious.
great way to put it. It's very ambitious. They think that they're making some great production, it seemed like.
But there's no meat.
There's no meat
No.
at all. Well, anyway, I'm hoping for better things from Judd next week in Dolphin Tale 2.
Well, you have nowhere to go but up.
Speaking of fluff,
For me, that really is true.
Well, a cuter fluff at least.
Yeah.
There we go.
You know,
So far, I would say this is probably my number one worst of the year.
there is really not much good about it.
There's really, I really struggled to get through it. All right, well, next up is When the Game Stands Tall, another lightly themed Christian film, and Joe's going to tell us about that.
When the Game Stands Tall. The film, which stars Jim Caviezel as a coach of a high school football team, Laura Dern plays his wife, and Michael Chiklis is the assistant coach. And it is about the record-setting 151 game from 1992-2003 high school football winning streak by the De La Salle High School of Concord, California. In particular, when a new team comes to take the reins, the struggle to reclaim the streak after it is broken. More drama follows, including a coach having a heart attack, that is Caviezel's character, and a popular player being killed. Spoilers, but once again, trailer. This movie sits comfortably in the sports movie tropes and follows the general themes of friendship and teamwork. The story is decent and the games are genuinely fun to watch here. There's some tension. The performances are all pretty good as well, though the biggest weakness is the fact that Caviezel and Dern seem to have little to no chemistry. Still, overall, it's pretty much what you'd expect, and it is a generally good story with a good message, and I give it a C+.
All right. Justin?
in many cases for film, the quality of the story will vary depending on the storyteller, and that's by far the weakest point of When the Game Stands Tall. We've talked in length here about my issue with Christian filmmakers and their lazy attempts at storytelling, most recent being The Identical, but in this film, which had the potential to earn a significantly higher grade, it gets pulled down dramatically. Though Like Heaven Is For Real from earlier this year, it's not the worst thing to be released, that honor being reserved for the atrocious God's Not Dead, but it leaves a significant amount to be desired. To start, the film desperately wants to deliver some emotional punches, but simply just kicks off by giving the audience some statistics and background in hopes that they will care 20 minutes later when the team encounters loss. Granted, the actors seem to be doing their best to give emotional performances, but the result is frequently forced on the director's side of things. Though with that said, here's the positive side of When the Game Stands Tall. Around the halfway point, the film gets significantly better, focusing less on these forced facts and more on the central concept of brotherhood through a couple interesting scenarios, such as visiting a rehab hospital. The film does devote an ample amount of time to its most interesting characters, and it pays off in some relatively intense football scenes. Unfortunately, the ending does go on a bit too long and does get slightly preachy, but out of all the Christian films we've seen thus far this year, I'd probably have to say When the Game Stands Tall might be the closest thing to a step in the right direction, and I give it a C+.
Well, I would say the best thing about the film are the scenes with Caviezel and the players. The scenes where it's just his family, especially if it's just him and Dern, and Joe pointed this out, they're just not good. I mean, it's like their two characters have never even had a conversation before. But Michael Chiklis as the assistant coach is my favorite of all of the adult characters. He's really good, gives a couple of rousing speeches. And there's a couple real emotional moments in the film as well, but they are always undercut with cliches. There's good choreography on the field, And honestly, this is the least Christian movie we've seen in 2014. It's not that it has like bad language or anything, it's just the religious themes are very much in the background. It certainly has good values, but it's not in your face about it. And that doesn't, bother me either way as much as it does some people, but I liked that this was a little bit subtle here. It's not a great movie, but definitely passable, and I will echo both of you gentlemen and give it a C+. The Christian element of it is really quite barely there. Mm-hmm. And Justin, did you find, you said, this was a step in the right direction for Christian-based movies. Do you think that's the reason why?
I don't think it needs to bludgeon audiences over the head with its themes. Yes, you can be a Christian-based movie, but think about this. There are movies and TV shows that do have Christian themes or undertones, and they work just as well as a regular storyline. And they don't need to constantly say, oh, well, the Bible says this, or go to Ezekiel 21 or something like that.
Wouldn't you say, though, that it depends on the themes of the film? I mean, one of your other higher graded ones was Heaven is for Real, which you mentioned.
Yes.
Obviously, that movie not only revolves around the concept of heaven on the whole, but the Greg Kinnear character is a preacher, much like Ray Liotta in The Identical. But, I mean, so obviously those themes are going to come up a little heavier in some films than in others.
Yes, but like I said when we talked about what would a Christian film have to do to win with me, we need legitimate actors, we need a decent script, and we need some people who know how to actually put together a film. A lot of these have just been super independent with people who seem to only be able to do this because they have the money to do it, and the result has been ridiculous. Case in point, The Identical.
Yeah, The Identical was bad. Certainly no argument about that. But I mean, I think a lot of them this year have had at least fairly sizable name people. Jim Caviezel obviously isn't on the A-list, but I mean, he's got a name. He has a popular television show right now. Greg Kinnear, obviously.
Sorbo.
Kevin Sorbo maybe veers a little bit more on the C-list of things.
Yeah.
But,
no offense.
I mean, I don't know. I think it's all in the performance, really. I mean, look at Boyhood. Eller Coltrane is a nobody. Does he give a great performance? Of course he does.
Yeah.
So I don't think you necessarily have to have a name actor to give a good performance.
No, but you still need someone who knows how to act, and if they don't, have somebody who knows how to direct them to act. Richard Linklater knows how to direct his actors.
I think Kevin Sorbo can act.
Well, yeah, he was the best part of God's Not Dead, even though he played a abysmal character, as does the rest of the ensemble. But point being, you still need a legitimate script and somebody who knows how to make a movie. Usually the movies I've been failing or giving D's to that are of the Christian ilk have had one or maybe two of those things, but usually is missing another component that pulls it down dramatically.
So Justin, just to clarify, would you say that you've had a tendency to give Christian movies a lower grade, not because they're overtly Christian and obvious about it, but because you just think that they're generally lower quality films?
Exactly.
Okay.
But you have stated that you would prefer them not to be so in your face about the themes.
Like, does that actually, bring down your grade? I think is one thing Dan has been wondering throughout the show.
Whenever any film is shoving its agenda in your face, I find that personally rather insulting and offensive, but...
Wait till we get to Omar.
But, I mean, the case could be made. Like, okay, we go see everything, we're doing a show. But the case could be made that most of these Christian-based movies are made for Christian moviegoers. God's Not Dead was never designed to be a mainstream hit with non-Christian audiences, I guess, is my point.
It just got big.
Yeah, it happened to get big.
It's something that
for
really...
whatever reason, I don't know.
They should have shown for, in special Christian, conventions and, churches, Fireproof. It's something that's meant for a Christian audience. They see it. Okay, it works with some themes, and people might have liked it. It served the purpose at the very least.
I'm not saying God's Not Dead is great. I believe I gave it a D or a D+. I mean, obviously, I didn't love it, but I guess my point is it such a problem that it's got a lot of Christian themes in your face when it's meant for a Christian-based audience?
To be honest, overall, most of the Christian movies that I've seen this year, I've been kind of impressed because I felt that they were either trying to be more subtle or at least trying to be different or play both sides of the fence here, try to show both sides. Like even God's Not Dead, obviously, I think they were trying to show some points you can argue about how good it was done, but
Poorly.
maybe. But context.
I thought that was the best part of it.
Notwithstanding, I kind of like that too. But the fact that they were even having a plot that showed that there was an argument on both sides, I think for an extremely Christian movie based on a Christian audience, I think that was fair.
And yet handled.
Hey, I think it was fair that they actually did that. You got to give them credit for doing that, whether or not it was done badly or not.
I give them pity points for presenting the argument. I can't give them credit for giving one side a huge advantage and demonizing any other opposing viewpoint.
Okay, putting God's Not Dead aside, because whatever, it wasn't that great. Even Heaven is for Real. That movie was extremely Christian, pretty much saying heaven exists, more or less, but still actually showing some really complex conflict within the main character, and even causing him to question his beliefs. And I think providing some reasonable counterpoints within a very Christian-based film, I think was a little more open to interpretation for wider audiences. Like, even though it was a heavily Christian film, you could still walk away from it saying, okay, at least it was presenting some other ideas.
Yeah.
In
the case of Heaven is for Real, it's not demonizing opposing viewpoints.
No.
I mean, yes, it is a Christian film. I'm not denying that by any means. But it does, at least somewhat, tastefully present unique concepts that you wouldn't see in other films, and some relatively decent character development.
But this is the real question, though. When it comes to When the Game Stands Tall, I didn't even think of it as a Christian film until you guys pointed that out to me. Had you guys never mentioned it, I would not think of it as a Christian film. So is it really, even though it is backed by a Christian group,
in all honesty,
is it really a Christian film?
It's a Christian film in studio only.
Really?
I think.
I don't consider this even a Christian film, to be honest, Justin.
Despite teaching a Bible study class and...
There are scenes in movies like that are Bible classes all the time. It doesn't automatically make it a Christian film.
Well, no, I suppose that's true.
I'm just saying, really, had you guys not told me that, I would not have thought of it as a Christian film. I still don't really. I think of it as a decent football movie.
Right.
Honestly. It's okay.
No, I agree completely with that sentiment. It's not even until maybe an hour in...
You get that
the coach even is talking to the star player about, hey, have you read such and such?
I'm like, oh wait,
whatever.
So you're teaching this class? Is this a Christian school? It made me think later on. It wasn't in your face. It was integrated rather smoothly, and it provides some nice messages, I think, for the film. Obviously for the characters to boost them, but I think it was really more the characters' interactions with each other and the events that occur that strengthened their bond.
To me,
not the religious.
Yeah, to me, it's more of a film about doing the right thing. Learning that, teamwork and losing or winning isn't everything kind of attitude.
It's a good message.
Will get you through. Yeah, I mean, to me, those aren't,
negative qualities.
Well, they're not exclusively Christian qualities, I guess is my point.
They're
they're universal,
ethical
qualities, right?
Yeah. And
so that's sort of where I stood on the movie.
That's why I liked it. So I think when you call it a Christian film, I don't know. I think you could argue it almost wasn't.
Almost.
I mean,
well, all right. The debate continues.
I guess.
Until the next one.
Let's go to our home media moment now, and that is the Oscar-nominated foreign film Omar, and Justin's going to talk about it.
Meet Omar, played by Adam Bakri, a young baker climbing over a separation wall to be with his girlfriend Nadia, played by Leem Lubani, during the day. However, at night he engages with his friends in what they consider to be freedom fighting. Though when their actions cause the death of an Israeli soldier, and Omar himself is captured and deceived into admitting guilt by association, he agrees to work as an informant, and is faced with trying to decide who he can actually trust. When I originally saw this, Omar was perhaps the first time this year in which I came extremely close to having my first A+ in 2014. The story knows exactly what it wants to do and how to do it, keeping it tight and drawing the audience further into the suspense of Omar's predicament. This is complemented by well-placed cinematography that highlights not just the struggles, but also helps audiences understand the protagonist's repetitive, albeit realistic routine. Alongside this come fairly strong performances and some well-placed twists that keep the film flowing smoothly and gradually building suspense without becoming reliant on constant action sequences. Granted, not every twist is a shocker, but it fits well with the narrative and feels right in place. Unfortunately, then comes the ending, which in a film that has been doing so well pacing everything else, provided a more than engaging storyline, ends in a generic action thriller-esque way that has been done so many times over. It's not an awful conclusion, but after such solid storytelling and acting, it comes across as frustrating this is how they chose to end it, and I leave Omar with an A.
Well, I have always appreciated movies that really allow the viewer to see how a group of people live completely foreign to the viewer's own experience. Omar gives us a chilling view of Palestine life in several aspects, yet I was never left thinking that the movie is being overly intense for dramatic purposes. It all seemed very real. I also think it's great that the movie offers no real solutions. That may be a negative to certain filmgoers who always want a happy ending, but it's a very real story, and of course sometimes in real life we don't always get the answers we seek. I give it an A-. I thought the ending did have a tonal shift in it. It had like intense scenes, like the torturing and stuff, but it wasn't like, they weren't action scenes.
No.
Until you get to the end of the movie. So for me, I think that did hurt it a bit, but it's still a very, very good watch. Joe, what'd you think of Omar?
Few conflicts have been as politically charged and lengthy as the battle between Palestine and Israel. This film takes the conflict down to its most basic human scale. We see our main hero as a human being, as well as revolutionary in some circumstances. Combine that with some sweeping visuals and gritty camera work, and you get a very well done story for the most part. I will admit that there are some melodramatic elements that might have been a little heavy-handed, and the political tones can be somewhat manipulative, but honestly I can forgive that considering how genuine this film was honestly trying to be. And I highly recommend this one. Definitely check it out, and I give it an A- as well.
Nice. Yeah, this was quite the good one. I had never actually heard of it. I guess I sort of missed that when they did the foreign language submissions for the Oscars this year. But one of the better. We've actually seen quite a few really good foreign movies this year for the home media moment.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them Oscar nominated, some of them a bit overlooked. Joe, did you think that the action sequence at the end hurt it at all?
I thought that was a little... That took me out of the movie a little bit, to be honest. I thought that it didn't quite fit the tone with the rest of it, because the thing I liked about the movie that was really strong was just how genuine, how real it was. Like the repetitive nature of it, the routine. It seemed like it was really just trying to show us what it was like rather than trying to manipulate us. Where towards the end, it just feels like it's a little more Hollywoodized, so to speak, more generic, and it's like, okay, let's a little more gung-ho now, and I thought that was a little weak. It was if it had just kind of tied off a little bit more evenly, I think it would have been better. I do agree. The ending was one of the melodramatic elements I didn't like. I thought that was a bit much.
Yeah.
I don't know if other of you, if this comparison will work for other of you, but for me, it kind of struck me in the same way as Hannah's ending. It was like it fit. I don't have issues with it, but it also feels incredibly safe.
There are probably a lot of movies like that. I never saw Hannah.
Yeah, I mean, that's not the worst comparison. I actually sort of thought about Zero Dark 30 in that regard. But,
really?
Well, just because, the first 2 hours and 20 minutes of Zero Dark 30 is Jessica Chastain trying to figure out where Bin Laden is and then convince other people to go with her. And then the last 20 minutes is the SEAL team.
Yeah.
Shooting Bin Laden. So it's like, for me, I mean, I love Zero Dark 30. It sort of fit with the entire theme of the film, which was let's get Bin Laden, but this seemed more unnatural than that.
So
I guess
for Zero Dark 30, you would have preferred it if they had cut to another scene and then she gets the memo on her computer, we got him, and then she's kind of looks back.
No. What I'm saying is it's perfect in Zero Dark 30. I just thought of the comparison because in tonal shifts, it's similar to Zero Dark 30. But the entire crux of Zero Dark 30 is leading up to that point.
And that's why we're excited.
Whereas in Omar, it seemed more forced and shoehorned. They didn't have to end it like that.
We have to give this a more awesome action scene because our movie's a little too boring.
Right.
It's not.
Right.
You feel like they might have thought that maybe audiences might not have been quite as intrigued throughout the whole thing. What if we just give this movie an ending where it's just there is no big payoff. And they kind of ended it that way anyway, but they try to make it a little more entertaining.
Well, it's like the filmmakers almost didn't have enough faith in their characters.
That's true.
To be compelling,
because think about it, the main character is supposed to be, but then again, he's supposed to be portrayed as this very human, believable young person.
Yeah.
So I mean, he's not supposed to be an action hero.
Right. That's true.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
Did you guys like the romance, the love triangle thing?
Yeah,
that was one thing that kind of brought it down a little for me. I thought I kind of hate that in movies. I thought it was a little unnecessary.
Well, I liked the element of him and her. The triangle, no. I can do without that, absolutely.
I thought the love triangle was a little too much.
Yeah.
Personally.
Well, it doesn't add really anything to the story.
Exactly.
You don't need it.
It's superfluous.
Yeah. I mean, the story would have been great with just the two of them. He's trying to get to her.
That's enough.
Needs to right. Don't you think that's enough?
With,
right,
with
exactly.
the situation, I think that's enough for the whole movie.
Yeah.
But if he's being gone for long periods of time, can you really fault her for seeking out other people?
No, but I think there's only so much you can do in a movie that's like trying to tackle the romance, the intrigue, the political elements. There's a lot going on, and you're trying to also keep this tight storyline that's kind of steady intrigue.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I guess the point is, do I fault her character? No, of course not. But none of that even needed to be on the screen or in the movie.
I thought it was unnecessary.
But yeah, if she wanted to do that, that's fine. But
you're giving the movie a lot of credit for the fact that it's realistic. I would consider that a realistic component.
Okay, that's fine. People eat breakfast every day too. I don't need to see that in every movie. You know what I mean? Like,
that's fair.
She, like I said, she could be having an affair or whatever. She could be seeing this other guy. It doesn't matter. You get my point. I mean, I'm not saying she couldn't have an affair. It's fine, but it's completely irrelevant to his story. I'm not saying it was done poorly.
No.
I'm not saying it was acted bad. It just was unnecessary. Is all. So for me that and the ending tone shift. I mean, look, we still gave it A minuses.
Yeah.
It's not like it hurt the film to have it in there. It just wasn't necessarily
As
needed.
I said, a little melodrama.
Yeah.
Didn't need to be there.
All right, well, let's move on now to our top 5. And if you've listened to our mini-sode thus far, along with our guest Peter, we all gave our top 10 favorite movies of the summer and our 3 worst movies of the summer. So what we did here for this show is sort of what we did with the Robin Williams wrap-up after the mini-sode. Came up with a definitive, from all of our lists, top 5 best summer movies, Film Fanatics style. So we'll start with the worst, and that is Legends of Oz, Dorothy's Return. It's the only movie that was on all 3 of our worst of the year lists. Just god-awful.
Garbage.
It was garbage, The music was okay. That's about the best thing I could say about it. Terrible animation. Other than Martin Short, terrible acting from everybody.
That's the reason I didn't feel it originally. I liked Martin Short in it.
Yeah, he was good. Although his character was
pointless,
really stupid.
Awful.
When she throws the blanket on him, or the curtain or whatever it was, and he struggles to get... Oh my gosh.
You're supposed to be a powerful,
are you kidding me right now?
And that's how easily you get thwarted?
Yeah. I love Martin Short, but that was...
rough.
That was rough. So that definitely gets our worst of the summer. Number 5 is actually a tie. We did this, all based on points. And number 5 is Snowpiercer and X-Men Days of Future Past. Both really great action movies of 2 completely different styles.
Yeah.
You've got the superhero component and the built-in fan base for X-Men. Mm-hmm. And then, obviously, Snowpiercer as a standalone film. Joe, do you want to speak to X-Men briefly?
Really, I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I think that it's kind of one of those aspects where you have, this really big fan base that has built up upon it. But the thing that was really awesome about X-Men is that I think people had a lot of hope for it, and it paid off because... As I said before, the X-Men franchise started really strong. It's kind of like one of the big leading forces in cinema in regards to superhero films.
That's true.
And so the fact that the last couple films, I mean, obviously you had, the X-Men 3 a lot of people didn't like. Origins Wolverine, which pretty much is despised. First Class people are a little divisive on. So it was just kind of interesting to see it finally go up, and then it hits back big, and it's speaking to the original comics. And so for a lot of old hardcore fans from back in the day, it'll be enjoyable to see that this story realized, but also with some new interpretations. I mean, you've got some great acting. You've got people like Hugh Jackman. He's basically become Wolverine.
Yeah.
He's really embodied the character more in the last couple movies than he ever did before. I mean, to be honest, I didn't even like Hugh Jackman that much as Wolverine when he started. I really didn't. I mean, too tall, too skinny, too young. Now he's big, he's beefy, he's older.
I was gonna say.
He's rocking it. He's rocking it. He's gotten a lot gruffer. He's like Wolverine that I read about in the comics and watching the cartoons. He's really just the star of this franchise. He's kind of like the Downey Jr. in Marvel Studios.
He is like the Tony Stark
and he'll be
the X-Men.
He'll be the crux
world.
As long as he can. And really just a really fun movie, really enjoyable. People loved it. I mean, if you haven't seen it, got some great special effects, really just a lot of great characters, a lot of fun. Good story, too.
Yeah, and pretty universally appreciated, I think.
Just about, yeah.
Yeah. And Snowpiercer, just a fantastic movie. It's really amazing how much can be done in a small setting. The entire movie takes place on a train, after the world has been frozen over for a couple of decades. And just really surprising performances from many, many great people in this movie. And, it's something that might seem like too intense for some people, but I think it's something anybody can really handle because of the themes that it's tackling.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yes, it's a little violent in places, but it's none of it is superfluous to the story.
No.
And it's just brilliant the way it all comes together.
Absolutely. I think it's just awesome that it was based on a graphic novel that I don't know how well it did over here. If it even, I know it got an English translation, but I don't know how many people have read it or even if it has a fan base. And a Korean director who made probably one of the more original monster movies, The Host. Yeah. And they just managed to bring it all together and completely blew people out of the water with it.
Yeah.
Honestly, Snowpiercer was probably like one of the biggest surprises for me this year.
I would say so as well.
I knew nothing about it, nothing to expect, and I just, honestly, it's really good.
I only even heard of it maybe like 2 weeks before we saw it for the show, and it blew me away.
Blew me away as well.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I'd been following it for a while. I wasn't sure if it was going to be really, really good or really, really bad, but just a really, really welcome addition to a flippity-floppity summer.
Yeah. Well, number 4 on our definitive summer movie list is Guardians of the Galaxy. Joe, this was your first A+ of the year, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's incredible how long that this is now held on to the number 1 spot. Word of mouth on it's fantastic. It's a great story from an unknown crew of characters.
Yeah.
Just the fact that everybody was so excited for this. Now, I was sort of in the minority. When I saw the trailer, I thought it looked not stupid, but
silly.
Kind of corny. Like, why is there a raccoon in this? The tree was bothering me. And then you see it, and it's like, oh my god.
It all works.
Everything works. All the voice acting from those two characters is great. The team works together. And I really loved how we didn't have to get a huge origin story for all of these different characters.
And you know what? That's one reason why I think this movie is one of the most successful superhero movies is because you're able to establish these characters so briefly and get right to the action.
Within moments.
Like, more superheroes need to do this.
Yeah.
We don't need to reboot with an origin story every single time. We know who Batman is.
Right.
We know who Spider-Man is. He's Spider-Man. Right. He's in the costume.
Guess
Let's
what?
fight a supervillain.
A
Let's get into a storyline and not build it up. And by the time we get to the third movie, it sucks.
Yeah. I completely agree.
Let's get into the story right away. People know who these characters are. There's no excuse now. Spider-Man, Batman. How many interpretations?
Right.
People know who Batman is. He's been around since 1939. If Guardians of the Galaxy can do this, you guys can do
take a cue.
Exactly.
I agree. It's one that I think all of us have now seen multiple times, right?
Yes.
So,
yes.
All right, number 3 on our list is Calvary. We just reviewed this last week. Big A+ for Joe and I. Our number 1 of the summer. A bit lower down on Justin's list, but yeah, just what a fantastic movie.
Oh, wow.
Something that needs to be seen again for sure.
Definitely.
To pick everything up and really good thriller, really good, talk about as we were with the Christian movies, a crisis of faith.
Yeah. Hey,
this is
that's a definitive Christian movie.
That's a definitive. Yeah, if you're going to talk about Christian movies, he plays a father and he has this huge crisis of faith, or does he?
Oh, does he?
It's like the greatness of this movie is it's all sort of open to interpretation because we know what he says, but not once in the film do we ever know what he's actually thinking and whether or not what he says is akin to what he's thinking. Number 2 on our list is Chef, my first A+ of the year.
And hey, you know what? Originally, the plan was to see 100-Foot Journey, same time slot, so I saw Chef again tonight.
Oh, well, sir. Just as great the second time, right?
Loved it. Great movie.
Yeah, it really is. Everything came together in this movie.
I would probably say that's the most pleasant surprise of the summer, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I don't know what I thought of it when I saw the trailer. I mean, it looked interesting. It had a few people I liked in it. But man, did it come together. And this is a movie. We talked about in the minisode Guardians of the Galaxy having this great soundtrack, which is rare for a superhero film. But for Chef, I mean, the soundtrack really sets the tone for every scene, every song is selected so perfectly. You know, the punk stuff and the more Latino flavored stuff when he first gets the food truck, and then when he starts making the Spanish food and everything. It's just, I mean, it's just such a great compliment. It's a great compliment to the script and the performances. And our number one, we just reviewed on the show last week, and that is Boyhood. I'll let Justin take this one.
I mean, what is there to say?
Your number one.
12 years completely paid off. We all give it A+. Eller Coltrane for being a complete no-name rocks it all through his 12 years of his life.
Mm-hmm.
Richard Linklater knows his characters. Hopefully he can keep the streak going.
And I'm surprised, honestly, that we haven't seen him in other movies. Because obviously they only filmed, a few weeks out of the year. He could have, gone on and done other movies and who knows, be some huge superstar right now. But he chose not to do that and stick specifically to this film.
I think that's a good point to bring up because that might be one reason why his performance is so good. He's not playing it like he's an actor. He's playing it like a real kid growing up.
Right.
All he has to go on besides the script is his own experience.
Is his own, emotions and stuff. Which is why, I guess, as they were writing from year to year, they would incorporate things from his own life into the script so he could
how many of
be more familiar with it.
The songs he listened to or the shows he watched or everything. Maybe that's
true.
What he liked.
Yeah, maybe Linklater sat him down and said, "Hey, what video games are you playing, this year? What's hot in your house?"
Wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
It would make more sense than just picking something random and making it forced. It doesn't seem like something Linklater would do.
That is true. Yeah, something we hadn't really thought about. But you're right, Justin. A+ from all of us, and the first film of the year to do that. So, in fact, other than Cavalry, I think it's the only movie that even two of us have given A+ to.
I believe so,
yeah. So it's pretty good testament there. So that is the official Film Fanatics number one film of the summer. Let's move in now to our final portion of the show, and that is the triple feature of older films. We kick it off with Arbitrage, and that is with Joe.
Arbitrage is a 2012 American drama film directed by Nicholas Jarecki and starring Richard Gere, Dan's favorite, and Susan Sarandon, Dan's real favorite, and Tim Roth, my favorite.
That's true, actually.
Richard Gere plays Robert Miller, a business mogul who is attempting to manipulate records from his company to cover up fraud. One night driving, he is involved in an accident which kills his mistress. Whoops. This film
Oopsie.
Whoopsie. This film follows Robert as he attempts to cover up both the embezzlement and the manslaughter charge with the cops hot on his trail. This film is a bit slow to start, but does have some genuine thrills to offer. It draws you in quietly, and its characters are brought to life by rather realistic portrayals, and you really have to admire it for that subtlety. Still, Gere doesn't really blow you away, but he is still playing a role that he is very comfortable with, so I can't really fault him for that. Honestly, if you get past the first 15-20 minutes, it's a rather interesting, compelling tale, and I give it a B.
Yeah, it is true that the first 20 minutes or so of this film are pretty slow, questionable about, okay, is this really what this movie's about? And it could be trimmed down to maybe 10 minutes or even less, but it is setting the stage for all of the punches to follow. The last 3/4 at least of Arbitrage is just a powerhouse. You're right, Joe. He is not one of my favorites, but it is easily one of the great performances from Richard Gere. The legal element, the lies, who's backstabbing who, even the father-daughter element with Britt Marling is strong. It's really a great movie. If it just trimmed up those first few scenes, I could see, even giving it a higher grade, but I leave this one with an A-. Possibly my strongest showing for a non-Chicago related Richard Gere film. Justin, what do you think of Arbitrage?
Easily the wittiest review section of our show today. A promising character-driven drama doesn't always paint the protagonist in the brightest light, but lets the actor in the role work through the issues, and that's really the strongest portion of Arbitrage. Gere's character is a selfish, unfaithful businessman dealing with circumstances that most would argue he had coming to him. Yet Gere plays him realistically and with such charisma that the story works and keeps the audience wondering if and how he will escape a seemingly hopeless downward spiral, unscathed with his dignity intact. Fortunately, the narrative makes use of the supporting cast to show just how many people are in the know and just how many people in his life are willing to play as dirty as he is to keep things secret. It's not always easy watching the events unfold, particularly when there's no one to get behind, but it does keep moving steadily and waiting to see what other component will be thrown into the mesh next. Unfortunately, this wraps up with an ending that, while understandable, feels a bit abrupt and safe, which caused me to bump this film from probably a B+ down to a B.
You know, you make an interesting point, Justin, because I've often said on this show, like Savages maybe is a good example of this, that some movies you just can't find someone to root for, to get behind. Richard Gere is really a scummy character in this movie. You know?
There was somebody to root for in this movie.
Who were you rooting for in the movie? The daughter?
No, the kid that he was trying to frame.
Oh, that is true. That's true.
Like
he's a pretty supporting character, though.
He was
really.
a supporting character, but like his story arc was one where every scene he was very loyal to Gere's character.
You're right.
And like, yes, he wasn't a major player, but he was still essential to the plot, and you wanted to see him get out of it.
That's true.
And it's like one of the few actual good things about Gere's characters that he does actually try to get him out of it. He doesn't want him to take the fall for it.
Well, you know what? I guess you've sort of answered my question, because my question was going to be really to myself, why does this movie do it better? Really, Gere is not a nice guy in this.
All.
I mean, he kills his mistress. I mean, unintentionally, obviously, but, still in the car accident, he kills her, tries 8 ways from Sunday to get out of it, to frame other people, but maybe that's why it works, because of his relationship with the kid.
Because it's like the one good thing about him.
You're right. It's the one redeem, because he's a lousy father, obviously a terrible husband,
and a businessman. He's ruining his company.
ruining his company. And I mean, Susan Sarandon's a lousy wife too. She's trying to take him for everything he's worth and this and that.
Yeah, she was pretty mean too.
It was hard to root for her too. But you're right. Maybe it is that relationship he has with the kid that redeems him.
Like that whole subplot was probably the strongest part, and that was also held together by his relationship with the kid. I thought those are like the best scenes, because you're right. He's a scumbag, but obviously there's something redeemable about him, because he doesn't really want this kid to go down for something he didn't do.
And the scenes with just the two of them are probably the strongest in the film, at least character-wise.
Yeah.
So you're right. Thank you for answering my question to myself. But all right, speaking of horrible characters, up next we've got An American Crime. This was my pick this month for Old Classic. In this pre-Juno role, Ellen Page plays Sylvia Likens, a girl whose parents are in a traveling circus. So they leave her and her sister, played by Haley McFarland, in the care of a single mother of 5 and fellow parishioner at their church, Gertrude Banishevsky, played by Catherine Keener. In this true story, things take a turn for Sylvia fairly quickly, as the eldest daughter of the Banishevsky family, Paula, played by Ari Grainer, accuses Sylvia of telling lies around school about her promiscuity. So Sylvia gets punished harshly, and it continues to get worse, including cigarette burns and being forced to put a glass bottle up her nether regions. Soon she's confined to the basement to be tortured, and all the kids join in, except her sister, and even bring some neighborhood kids over to have their way with her. Bradley Whitford co-stars as a DA. As intercut with the story are small courtroom scenes taking place after the fact, with testimony from the characters involved. Now, I showed American Crime this week because I had mentioned it a few weeks ago in a top 5 and knew that neither of my co-hosts here had seen it. It is a testament to how powerful a film can be on a small budget. There's no effects here, no elaborate sets, nothing but a great script and amazing performances. Page is great here, and Keener really makes the audience hate her like they're supposed to. It is a great movie, though definitely not for the weak of stomach, and it gets an A- from me. Justin, what'd you think of this one? Not my usual Old Classic fare.
Not particularly. Not a bad thing, though.
It's really not that thing you do.
No, it's not that thing you do, or Roger Rabbit. I usually go on the more fun tip.
Happy go lucky.
Yeah.
This is arguably one of the hardest films to grade on Film Fanatics because, at least for me personally, it involves a massive amount of time to devote to separating qualities over personal feelings. An American Crime is a film packed with brave performances, particularly from Page in such a young role, but the dark and painful to watch subject matter can sometimes make it difficult to take these in. That's not to say that these necessarily take away from the film, but it's definitely far from easy viewing. Director Thomas O'Haver definitely knows when and how to throw the strongest emotional punch that he can, but sometimes production values resembling that of a TV movie pulls some of this down. An American Crime has some strong and very well done qualities going for it, and will likely leave one pondering how many good people there are left in this world, but has a few things that keep it from being even stronger, and I give it a B+.
Joe, what'd you think?
Well, I have to echo the fact that this film is basically, admittedly done on a lower budget, obviously, but utilizes for the most part a really good cast, and I think that Page really demonstrated how from an early age she is able to sell a really good character. Though I didn't feel like she was really in it as much as I thought she would have been, ironically. Like, I didn't feel like she was as much of the focus of the story as she could have been, because they were trying to focus on so many elements altogether.
Right.
So it does take a while to string things ultimately together. I feel like this is a small thing, but it did kind of bother me. Some scenes could have probably been taken out to strengthen the rest of it. Like, James Franco's character did not need to exist.
No.
He did not. I'm sorry, those scenes weren't really necessary.
You could have had his character in there once.
And that would have been enough.
As not James Franco, just as some person. Obviously, they, I think, put him in there a couple more times because of his star power. But I think it showed just the disconnect that this mother had with reality.
Maybe.
You know, but continue.
That's possible. I could see that. I just felt like those scenes didn't really add as much to the rest of the story, which was more important, which was some of the terrible events that we did see listed there. Overall, though, great cast. For the most part, the storytelling was pretty fluid. I did think that the violent nature of the film is definitely a lot to take in, but I think it's a story that definitely needs to be told. Really, overall, I did really enjoy it, but my biggest problem with the movie, which actually keeps me from giving it a great grade, is that Keener is probably one of the least intimidating people that I've ever seen on screen. Like, I just don't associate her with creepy or threatening at all.
This is definitely a non-Keener type character, you're right.
Don't get me wrong, I get what they were going for. It seemed like she was just kind of really out of it and crazy, and she's not supposed to evoke much rage or sinister presence, but it didn't really sell it for me.
Okay.
I couldn't picture it. Like, you're supposed to be really frightened and disgusted by her, and I'm like, it's just sweet Keener. Like, for me, I didn't feel like she differentiated that much from the roles I'd seen her in previously.
Okay.
So I would leave it a B+ as well, mostly because of that. That was the biggest problem I felt with the movie. I just didn't really feel that she sold me as being this threatening force.
I definitely think in those first few scenes with the cigarette burn and the bottle specifically, I think she really showed some range there that we had not seen from her previously. You didn't think so?
I'd actually agree with you, Dan. I thought it was. I mean, I'll give you that it's a different character for her, but she did present this huge, dramatic, dark difference from anything that she had done before, and I would say she definitely brought it.
That's because the subject matter was really dark, and the scenes were really dark, and the actions that the character was taking were dark, sure. But she could have performed it a little more genuinely, I felt. I didn't feel any real menace when she put the cigarette burns on the skin.
That's definitely a difference for Justin and I guess. I definitely felt it. Now, I will admit, obviously, in the later scenes with her, she's really, like, drugged up on sleep meds or whatever.
Whatever it was,
yeah. So she was definitely, like, out of it, and she certainly wasn't menacing. I would say once you hit about maybe the halfway mark, when you put Ellen Page in the basement and keep her there, you're right. From then on, it's more like the kids take over.
Yeah.
Which I thought was more frightening.
It is. But who do they learn from? You know,
which I would say
once again,
brings forth the presence.
Yeah,
character-wise, correct. Performance-wise,
not so much for you.
I've seen better.
Okay, I gotcha.
I'm not saying she's like the quintessential most evil person I've ever seen on film, but
it's not an Annie Wilkes, you know.
Well,
yeah, she was pretty hardcore.
To what is.
I'm just saying, like, I think that's a good comparison, though. I mean, you got Kathy Bates in Misery, very similar, kind of sweet, genuine, just very quiet, not really seeming that threatening.
And then,
but just
crazy.
You know, you just see the other side. With her, I get what it's supposed to be. Maybe it's how this woman was.
How about Ellen Page's parents, though? What was their problem?
I don't know.
I just wish I had more time to actually have something to do with them.
I kind of wish that was more of a fleshed out area, to be honest. Because I felt like they were interesting. I kind of wish we'd learned more about why they did what they did.
Well, I feel like we may not know. I mean, it's a true story. They may have gone away with the circus and disappeared. I mean,
Maybe they never even came back to the
yeah,
tower.
they may have. I mean, it may have been nice if they explained that in the epilogue or something. But you're right; they sort of disappear. It might have been nice to get a little more background on them, but I'm not sure if we know. What do you think of the courtroom scenes?
Honestly, they were good. I like a good courtroom drama. I wish they'd had more of that. I wish it would have been a little more balanced there. Like maybe you could cut out 1 or 2 Franco scenes, have an extended court scene. But you know, once again, though, West Wing. So
yes, that's true. The old West Wing
Bradley Whitford,
performers. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm kind of going back to the whole Omar. It's nice, but I don't really think it's necessary to the actual storyline. Like, yes, obviously it does lead to a big court dispute,
right?
Which is understandable, but I mean, you could still just tell the central story and give the epilogue from there.
To be fair, you didn't necessarily need the court stuff.
That's true. But you know what? I think it was a good scene setter. He'd be talking to one of the kids about a specific incident, and then cut to that day.
You get to see the before and after. Like, the kids are talking, they're reminiscing, they seem like perfectly nice little kids.
Right.
And you see they did that, it's more shocking. So narratively, it was a good scene setter. So I kind of...
That's why I sort of liked it.
If it had just been straight drama with everything taking place at a set time period or in the past there, I think it could have been just as strong. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that the court scenes necessarily hurt it.
Well, I'm glad you guys got to see it. I'm glad you guys at least mostly liked it.
Yeah.
B pluses, pretty good.
Pretty good.
No complaints.
And now we're going to do our final film of the show, and that is our Oscar A to Z, Anastasia, which is the 1956 film, and it won Best Actress for Ingrid Bergman, and it was also nominated for Best Score. Justin's going to talk about Anastasia.
Since the Grand Duchess Anastasia's disappearance, General Bonin, played by Yul Brynner, has been searching for the perfect impersonator to get his hands on her £10 million inheritance. Then when he stumbles across Anna, played by Ingrid Bergman, a suicidal amnesiac bearing a striking resemblance to the Grand Duchess, he may finally have a chance to convince even the greatest of skeptics in Russian royalty, Dowager Empress Maria Fedorovna, played by Helen Hayes. This is a bit of a surreal viewing experience because, speaking from someone who grew up with the 1997 animated film, yes, I know it takes historical liberties all over the place, one can see the parallels between the two films. Obviously, there's no fantasy elements in this story, but that's not to say that the charisma of Brenner and Bergman doesn't pack some movie magic all their own. The sets are gorgeous and vivid, and the cinematography does nothing short of making that abundantly clear to the audience. Unfortunately, the color scheme pales in comparison to Technicolor's more vivid look, but since it's most noticeable during the night scenes, it's at least somewhat forgivable. Alongside that, the film does run just slightly long, and Bergman gets arguably a little too much into her character, but this all leads up to an ending that will leave audiences every bit as blown away as the royalty. Overall, Anastasia is not without flaws, but the production values well make up for them, and I give it a B+.
All I could think of when you said striking resemblance, though, was the identical.
Oh, God.
Dexter, or whatever his name is, and his striking resemblance to, or Drexel Hemsley. All right, Joe, what'd you think of Anastasia?
Well, it's not the Don Bluth film, but you can certainly see some of the parallels from this one as inspiration, as Justin pointed out. And this version is very well shot with some excellent costumes and great set design to really be admired. It feels very genuine in that sense, and it goes along with a rather lesser bombastic score than you'd imagine, actually. So it does have some element of grandiosity, but not too much. The characters are complicated with very human flaws, and the relationships are punctuated by really good dialogue. The conversations are really the strongest aspect here, as well as a great performance by the bald wonder, Yul Brynner. The only negative here is that the acting from Bergman seems a little weak at points, honestly, for a main character, but then again, maybe that's because the character wasn't really as well written as she could have been. Still, it was a very fluid narrative, and with some really good characters and a few really good performances, I give it a B+ as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Bergman is very melodramatic in this film, surprisingly so. And I would say the worst of the main cast. Brenner, of course, is great. Everyone knows that. And Martisha Hunt as the Baroness gives a great performance as well. She was probably my favorite of the characters. Visually, it is okay. Nothing really amazing considering the epics of the time. Justin noted the color not being quite as strong as some of the Technicolor movies of the day. But it does great set pieces and costumes, so it definitely gets points for that. And Joe, you mentioned the score. The score is not at all overpowering, as we tend to see in a lot of films from this era, and I really liked that.
It was different.
It was. Most movies, especially with this kind of like epic tale.
I mean, it's like you'd have like the sweeping string quartet at the beginning scenes.
Yes.
Like, da da da. You
right.
know, like everything would be operatic and like booming classical music. This one wasn't really that.
It was
noticeable.
understated.
Yeah.
And one of the few that we've seen, of that nature, and I really liked that. I also liked some of the frank dialogue. It seemed quite ahead of its time. Overall, the film is good, but not outstanding. I don't know if I'd ever watch it again, but it definitely does the trick. I give it a B. I wish Bergman was a little stronger, though. That would have knocked me up to a B+.
She kind of was the weak link.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the Oscar went to her because she's in Ingrid Bergman, and, she's great and everything. She wasn't that great in this.
She's honestly the weakest actor of the main ones, I'd say.
If there's anybody who really does do a fantastic job in this, it's got to be Brenner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Helen Hayes is good as well.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
She could have gotten a nom. So,
yeah. So I was a little surprised by that. But, overall I thought it was good, but not great. Now, I've never seen the Don Bluth version.
Well, it's better.
Better than this, yeah.
Honestly,
Sure.
It's just as good, or probably better, I'd imagine.
But it takes a more fantastical element to it, or?
Yes.
Okay.
And it also, I think when we were watching, we pointed out some things like, you can tell it drew some inspiration because some characters, like Brenner's assistant and also this other assistant, are combined into another character. I think his name is Boris.
Okay.
And you can clearly say, wow, this is supposed to be
right from the movie.
These two characters into one.
Oh, isn't that something?
Obviously, I mean, there's the whole swindling. There's the basic plot's the same. Anastasia is a little different. I think she's a little more snarky, but, a little less much of an airhead.
Okay.
But it's kind of one thing I take note now as we're talking about it, how the general desires in the public change. Like back in the 50s, Yul Brynner would have been seen as this big masculine force for the romantic lead.
Right.
And then you got 90s, you get Dimitri, who's kind of like more of the pretty boy.
Okay.
But they serve kind of the same function, and they're very similar in a lot of ways. They're very similar, despite very different backgrounds. But it was kind of cool to see, wow, Bluth obviously must have seen this movie and taken some hints. And
right.
I think it's a good structure for it, really. The only thing that this movie could have maybe used was a good villain like Christopher Lloyd.
Well, most movies can. I mean, what would Roger Rabbit have been?
This is true.
Maybe not as
Without
good.
Christopher Lloyd, I would definitely agree with that. All right, well, that is going to do it for the show this week. If you have not checked out our mini-sode yet for the best and worst of summer, definitely do that. And also, if you missed our last full show, it is our first ever video show. So you can check that out on our page or on Joe's Merlin channel as well. Along with all of the other great videos, including you guys doing your first of the controversial movies. I always want to say Passion of the Christ. What is it, Last Temptation of Christ?
The first one.
Yes, the Last Temptation of Christ. So that is up as well. And if you have not subscribed to our channel yet, go ahead and do that. And you can also check us out on Facebook. Film Fanatics with an exclamation point is the way you can do that. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you back here next week. Bye!